Hello, I'm Oliver Colling, and this is my 70s TV childhood. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast which looks back fondly to growing up in 1970s Britain, and the role that television played in our lives, and indeed in our families' lives too. Yes, it was a time of brown and orange clothes, instant mashed potato, and economic ruin for the UK, but for me and for lots of you listening, I suspect, it was a marvellous time, with no cares, little responsibility, and not much appreciation of what life will be like once we got more serious and grown up. In short, it was our childhood, and like most people, I remember it fondly. As always, thank you for all your messages on the blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com, on our social media channels of Facebook, Twitter/X, LinkedIn and YouTube, and of course via email, oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. Want to mention in particular this time, firstly apologies to Steve-O, who left a comment on the blog a few months ago, which got stuck in our sophisticated cybersecurity shield, i.e. I think I pressed the wrong button and put it into quarantine by mistake when I was reviewing new comments. Very sorry, Steve-O. But Steve-O shared a lovely story inspired by our mentions of the Tufty Club. You can find it on the blog, but the short version is that when the local Tufty Club PC visited the school, one of his teachers told him to look up and down rather than left and right. And as he did what he was told, looking up and down rather than left and right, then told him he was a stupid boy for looking up and down in front of the whole school. That's not very nice, is it? But Steve-O had the last laugh as he retold the story at his leavers assembly, much to the embarrassment of the teacher concerned. Well done. Thanks to all of you who take the time to get in touch. It really makes producing the podcast worthwhile. And if you like what you hear, do tell your friends. I'm sure they'll love listening too. So on to today's episode. I'm recording this in June, and as often happens in the UK, we've been having a heatwave, which, translated, means it hasn't rained for a few days, and it's also been a bit warmer than normal. When this happens at this time of year, I always look back fondly to the summers of the 1970s, and, in particular, to our primary school sports day. Some of you may remember we looked back to those brilliant sporting occasions in June 2023, when we reminisced about the ultimate school sports day, which was the TV show We Are the Champions. Yes, we're in the days where the smells of next-door barbecue, burnt sausages and burgers wafts around the neighbourhood, mingling in with the scent of burning flesh as it goes pink after being exposed to the sun after 6 months of being covered up under several layers. And then there are music festivals for all the family, outdoor classical concerts and cinema screenings, and major sporting events like Royal Ascot, Wimbledon, and test matches in cricket. Our optimism is boundless. And then, when we do get caught out by the weather, we make a brave show of getting on with it and still having a great time in a very British sort of stipper-for-lit way. It was the same in the 1970s, although, in my memory, it never seemed to rain much during the summer. Which it must have done, this being Britain. We didn't always have the variety of outdoor events as we have now. I think music festivals were more the preserve of a certain kind of teenager and bunch of drug-fueled hippies, rather than the family-friendly events we now see. I think we're also a bit more locally focused as well, as I remember there were lots of local events like village fetes, garden parties, and activities around people's workplaces and schools. Many big employers had sports and social clubs, which provided no end of events and activities, both social and sporting, and also provided events for all the family at minimal cost, in stark contrast to the big ticket prices we pay now for concerts and festivals. One of the highlights of Padgate, the village where I grew up as a small child, was the Vicarage Garden Party, organised by my mother and father, and held in our pretty enormous garden, or so it seemed as a small child. I used to love it. There were games for adults and children, tug-of-war competitions, stalls selling sweets and cakes and all kinds of things. Afternoon tea was served on the lawn, and it really was like something for the 1950s rather than the 1970s, especially given my father normally wore a pale linen jacket and a Panama hat. so it looked every inch the vicar from an Agatha Christie novel. And then there were all sorts of events connected with my primary school. At the first suggestion of sunshine, there was the constant nagging on of teachers and the playground monitors about being allowed on the playing fields. My school had what seemed to me a huge open green expanse of playing field, and the thought of being allowed to play on it during the summer was pretty intoxicating. Eventually, the order would be given to allow us to play on the grass, and the usual playground games of football or pretending to be soldiers, and instead of falling down on the tarmac of the playground, we could fall down on the grass, leaving huge grass stains in our knees. The repertoire of games also widened as old cricket bats and battered tennis rackets emerged from winter hibernation. I remember learning to play cricket in what were quite tricky circumstances, playing with an old bat, a tennis ball, and about 30 fielders, which I suppose was quite a good way of learning good shot placement, especially when the one hand, one bounce rule was applied. But I suppose the highlight of the sporting calendar was the school sports day. This was the one time of year when everyone had to get involved in sport, whether they wanted to or not. At my primary school, we had a 100-metre track laid out, or maybe it was 100 feet, I can't remember, and it was marked out by using some kind of liquid which turned the grass brown and sort of burnt it. I'm guessing it was some acid or creosote or something. Actually, hang on. Let me take a look at Tinternet and see if they can help. Oh, this Tinternet, it's the future. It's the future, I swear it is. Oh, this is interesting. Now, here we are. It's amazing what you can find on here. Thanks to pitchcare.com, I can tell you from their article on the art of line marking, and I quote, "Early marking materials did not have the ability to last long, being easily washed out during rain. To overcome this problem, some ground staff resorted to adding weed killers or substituting white line marking materials with creosote. The use of these materials generally killed off the grass, and between the 1960s and the 1980s was an accepted practice. Law now bans the use of lime and creosote." I'm not surprised. I'm absolutely stunned. I was only joking with the creosote line. But it now seems that I, and I'm sure many of you, are running on tracks marked out by weed killer and deadly poison. Oh well, doesn't seem to have done me any lasting damage. Or has it? Well, back to the sports day. At our school, I remember we had a whole range of events, ranging from the more straightforward running events through to the more exciting, well, for me anyway, events like the egg and spoon race, the sack race, and the race where you had to run down the track balancing a beanbag on your head. Do you know, whoever invented the beanbag must have cleaned up in the 1970s, as every school had them, and we used them for all sorts of things, like carrying them around obstacle courses, throwing them around in the school hall, and, as mentioned, balancing them on your head as you attempted to run/walk down the track. There was also much talk of a game actually called beanbag, but we never found out whether this was true or what the rules were. So, if your family has grown rich off the back of selling beanbags to primary schools, I salute you. Oh, and if anybody does know the rules of the mythical beanbag game, please let me know. We also had more traditional events like long jump and high jump. Well, as I remember, there wasn't any sandpit or big mat to break your fall. No, you just jumped as far or as high as you could, landed on the grass, and suffer the consequences. I remember that the high jump used to be a rope suspended by 2 wooden poles, and on every sports day, it was guaranteed to include at least one serious injury from the high jump. I remember my friend Andrew jumping over the rope and dislocating his shoulder when he landed on the grass. He then stood up and said, "Don't worry, this happens all the time," as he grabbed his arm and attempted to pop it back in, as he said. I shan't tell you what happened next, but he returned to school a few days later with a broken collarbone and a course of heavy painkillers. One thing that we didn't have, thank goodness, was the parents' race. Now, I'm not a parent myself, But the thought of my mother or father lining up to race against the other mums and dads is inconceivable. The sheer embarrassment of being even seen with your parents after you get to a certain age is crippling. But to have them race in public would have been absolutely mortifying. I did read recently in the newspaper about a dad who'd sustained a serious injury in the parents' race as he'd been overtraining and snapped some tendons or something, or strained some ligaments. That's not altogether surprising, in my opinion. In spite of the potential of creosote poisoning, broken bones from the high jump, and the extremely annoying way that my egg always managed to fall off its spoon at a vital part of the race, I remember primary school sports days as being great fun. And it genuinely didn't matter who won or lost. Apart from the year when I was demoted from winning the sack race as my running technique was called out as cheating. Can you believe it? Yeah, well, where are the rules saying you have to jump and not run? Well, probably in the same place as the rules for that beanbag game I was talking about earlier. And at the end of the day, when all the prizes had been won, parents, children and teachers all got together for sandwiches in orange squash before going home. Happy days. So that was just setting the scene for our episode, talking about We Are the Champions. But it wasn't the only show on TV where there was a sort of multi-activity sports day feel to it. There was one incredibly popular show where not only did we see a big variety of sports, but we also saw some of our sporting heroes from different sports pitted against each other in really intense competition. I have to say it was the classiest school sports day in the world. The Superstars, or simply Superstars as it became known, was a TV sports competition in which elite athletes from a variety of sports competed against each other in a number of events, a bit like a decathlon, I suppose. The athletes weren't allowed to compete in their own sport, or had to do that heavily handicapped, and points were awarded for the position in which the competitor placed in each event. The competitor with the most points at the end of all 10 events was declared the champion. So that seems pretty simple, and on the face of it sounds a bit dull. But I have to say it wasn't dull at all. The idea was dreamt up by Dick Button, an American Olympic gold medalist in figure skating, and it was first shown on US TV in February 1973. The British version swiftly followed and was first shown on the 31st of December 1973 as Britain's Sporting Superstars. The legendary David Vine, who was the main presenter of the BBC programme from 1973 till 1985, said, when looking back on how the show began, "In 1972, Ron Pickering, myself, Don Revie, Billy Bremner and TV producer Barney Colan sat in a hotel in Leeds and formulated Superstars, but the BBC dismissed the idea. Then Dick Button started in the States and the BBC bought the rights." What a shame, David. That's a bit of a hard luck story. The events included all sorts of sporting challenges. These included things like the 100 metres, the 800 metres, cycling, rowing, swimming, something to do with football, sort of football skills I seem to remember, an obstacle race. And let's not forget the gym test, which even as a child looked absolutely horrendous, and included the legendary parallel bar dips, where the competitors had to do as many as they could in a minute, or was it 30 seconds? I can't quite remember. Whichever it was a gruelling test and much loved by the viewing public. The first competition was won by David Hemery, the 1968 400 metres champion, who beat a stellar field of Jackie Stewart, Bobby Moore, Joe Bugner, Roger Taylor, Tony Jacklin and Barry John. What a fantastic lineup. Even at an early stage, the competition was fierce and attracted the very best of British sporting talent. That first event was a huge success, so the BBC did it again in 1974. And who did they get to join that year's stellar lineup? Let's see what David Vine can tell us.
This is David Hemery, Olympic gold medalist, athlete extraordinary, and sporting superstar. The man who excited millions when he took the superstar title at the Crystal Palace in London. David Hemery now defends that title and lined up to challenge him for the £4,000 first prize from boxing, the light heavyweight champion of the world, John Conte.
Anything I go in for, I go in to win, you know. I know it's a bit of fun and everything, you know, and the money involved, but it's a competition nevertheless, and I just got to win, just like all the other lads there in here to win. That's why.
England's #1 soccer striker, Mike Channon.
I fancy to do quite well on the track events. The gymnasium, not so good, probably. The rowing and the swimming are a bit dodgy, but the others, I'd hope to do reasonably well.
Also from soccer, one of the world's greatest midfield players, Colin Bell.
I'm a little bit worried about the competition because I've dropped out of the swimming, but one of the events is rowing, and the reason I dropped out of the swimming is I can't swim, so I'm a bit concerned about the rowing.
The British and European welterweight boxing champion, John H. Stracey.
But I treat it like the Olympic motto, it's not to win, but to compete, which I thoroughly enjoy,
Record-breaking, round-the-world yachtsman, Shea Blythe.
It's not sad for me because I'd have much preferred to have seen all these chaps have a go at sailing, so I could have had a laugh.
England's all-round test cricketing star, Tony Greig.
A bit worried about the gym hall and perhaps the track events. I think it doesn't really fit in with cricket, I don't think.
And the man they're all out to beat, the reigning Superstars champion, David Hemery.
I think that probably John Conte and Colin Bell are the two, I would say, who'll be the fittest and the strongest overall.
Together, they make the Sporting Superstars.
Again, what a fabulous lineup of sporting stars. I have different memories of all of those from my childhood. People like John Conte, the handsome but deadly boxer with a smooth tongue and devastating punch. Colin Bell, the footballer who seemed to go on forever and ever. And fancy old Mike Channon being there as well. David Hemery didn't manage to retain his title in 1974, losing out to John Conte, but Superstars was firmly fixed in the British sporting calendar and in the British TV schedules. Over the next few years, the BBC extended the concept to Europe, so we had European Superstars, where the very best of European athletes competed against each other. So we saw the likes of Bjorn Borg and Kevin Keegan competing against each other and providing memorable moments, such as when Keegan fell off his bike during the cycling leg and sustained some pretty nasty-looking injuries, which I, as a 9 or 10-year-old, thought was absolutely fascinating and brilliant. In spite of the injuries, good old KK fought on and won his heat, famously saying during the post-cycling interview, "These people here in the stands have come to see me make a fool of myself, and they've got a right to it." Other highlights included racing driver James Hunt in the final, where he came third. I think he came third, despite allegedly amazing all the other participants by chain-smoking between every event, and then performing brilliantly. What a man. We shall not see his like again. And footballer Stan Bowles, always a character, provided great entertainment in the 1976 series by shooting a hole in a table with his loaded gun in the shooting event, before capsizing his canoe in the kayaking section. Not surprisingly, Stan came last. The late 70s were the heyday of superstars as audiences regularly reached 10 million, and new champions emerged like Keith Fielding from Rugby League and Brian Jacks, the judoka, who was to become the most awesome performer on those parallel dips. I think that for most people now, Brian Jacks remains synonymous with superstars. In 1979, he won the British competition by a mile, and then also won the European final too, before missing out on World Superstars due to a bout of shingles. Oh dear, Brian, that doesn't sound very nice. Jacks continued to dominate the show for a few years until the pole vaulter Brian Hooper came along to sweep all before him. The show remained popular in the UK and US, but interest in Europe dwindled very quickly. Audiences in the UK began to drop off as the 80s continued, and at the same time, international superstars events were cancelled. And to be honest, the show became more about sports people who were good all-round athletes, rather than the real superstars of individual sports having a go at different sports. Part of the appeal was always in seeing really famous sports stars competing against each other. What we ended up with was professional superstar contestants, who we probably might not have even heard of had they not been on the show. With viewing figures falling and potential participants ever more reluctant to sign up to the show with scheduling conflicts and insurance demands, the BBC's decision to end the show was neither unexpected, nor actually mourned by that many. And although David Vine, Ron Pickering, and executive producer Peter Hilton Cleaver did fight to keep the show on the air, it was all to no avail. In 1985, Superstars was cancelled. Like all good 1970s TV shows, there have been attempts to revive it. But in the modern age of ultra-professional sport, the concept just doesn't seem to work. Superstars lives on in our memories, largely because it was so different. It was exciting, unpredictable, and provided memorable moments like Kevin Keegan falling off his bike or Stan Bowles shooting the table. The show seems to feature in almost every nostalgia show about 70s TV because of that, I think. But for me, the prospect of seeing the really famous sports people I knew taking part in what was the equivalent of a very high-powered school sports day was absolutely compelling. And you know, it's really hard to imagine that happening now. What are your memories of Superstars? Can you do more parallel dips a minute than Brian Jacks? If so, not only am I extremely impressed, but it would be great if you could share that with us and let us know by leaving a comment on our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com, on one of our many social media sites, or just by emailing oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. That's all for now. We will be back next week with the next instalment of our popular 70s TV trivia quiz, and in a fortnight with the next regular edition of the podcast. Until then, take care, do try and exercise responsibly, and do avoid any Kevin Keegan type sporting accidents, and join us again soon for more from My 70s TV Childhood.